Dr. Jason Rowe stood frozen in the middle of the grand hall of Cathari Prime, struggling to keep his composure as 1,000 alien eyes stared at him. Waiting for his answer, the princess had just asked a question no human ambassador had ever faced before, and it echoed like thunder in his mind. How many times can humans mate daily? The room was a swirl of color, sound, and sense beings with wings, scales, glowing skin, or floating heads. All turned their attention toward him with visible interest, while Princess Zelenara, tall and radiant with shimmering violet skin and crown-like tendrils rising from her head, leaned forward with genuine curiosity, not a hint of sarcasm or embarrassment on her face. Jason had expected questions about Earth's politics, technology, maybe even food. But not this, not something that turned his role from cultural diplomat to an unwilling biology subject. He swallowed hard, aware that every word he said would be translated and broadcast across dozens of alien species and could define Earth's first impression in the galactic concord. Well, he began cautiously, trying to choose words that wouldn't embarrass the human race or spark confusion. It depends. Human biology varies greatly by individual, so there isn't one fixed number. A silence fell over the hall as translators whispered his reply into the ears of the gathered dignitaries. And then suddenly there was an eruption, not of laughter, but of intense chatter, curiosity, and even awe. Variable capacity. One alien echoed, adaptive. Stamina, another repeated thoughtfully. Jason blinked, realizing his vague answer was being interpreted as something far more impressive than he intended. The princess tilted her head, her gemstone eyes gleaming with interest, and asked, "So you were saying, humans have no limit?" Jason stammered, raising his hands. No, it's not." But it was too late. The crowd had already taken the idea and run with it. Zelenara smiled, not mockingly, but as if she had just discovered a secret treasure hidden within a seemingly ordinary species. And she stood, her voice ringing across the chamber. "Let it be known that humans possess boundless potential. In honor of this revelation, I request an official cultural trial to better understand their methods of endurance." Jason's jaw dropped as murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber, some aliens clapping, others nodding their heads or waving colorful appendages. "What is happening?" he whispered under his breath, wishing Earth's embassy hadn't lost signal 5 minutes before the question was asked. He tried to protest, stepping forward, but 2 royal guards gently guided him back, informing him that the princess's decree was considered binding under Cathari custom once she requested an interspecies exchange trial. Refusal would be seen as a grave insult. Jason's thoughts raced. How could he explain to his superiors that their cultural attach was about to become the center of an alien experiment, not because of military strategy, but because of a misunderstanding about human intimacy? Yet, even as panic rose, a strange part of him noticed something else. Zelenara wasn't mocking him. Her curiosity seemed sincere, even respectful. She approached, her presence commanding yet calm, and spoke with a tone that almost felt personal. "I have studied hundreds of species, Dr. Rowe. None have shown such range, such flexibility of thought or form. Your people hide strengths behind modesty that is fascinating." Jason managed a nervous chuckle. "We're just trying to survive, really." The princess nodded slowly. "Exactly. Survival is not only about power, it is about will." Before Jason could respond, he was led away by 2 attendants who explained, in tones far too cheerful for his comfort, that preparations would begin tomorrow for the first stage of the tenacity trials, a traditional method used to assess new species' worthiness for deeper alliance. "It's not a competition," one of them added brightly. "More like a demonstration of character, mind, body, and emotion." Jason groaned inwardly, already imagining what kind of twisted alien obstacle course lay ahead. Tea. spent the night in a luxurious chamber that felt more like a royal exhibit room. Translucent walls showed images of distant galaxies. Floating orbs provided soft light, and the bed adjusted to his body's temperature perfectly, yet he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the princess's question again, and the laughter wore. Was it admiration? Of the gathered alien delegates, Earth's first impression on the galactic stage had somehow shifted from cautious newcomer to rumored superspecies, and it all rested on him correcting or surviving that perception. The next morning, he awoke to find a new outfit waiting, sleek, black, flexible, and clearly designed for a performance. He dressed and followed the attendants to a domed chamber filled with spectators. Screens displayed his face, labeled human. Representative Jason Rowe, Endurance Trial 1. His heart pounded as he realized the trial had already been promoted as a public event. Standing across from him was Princess Zelenata, flanked by her advisors. She raised her hand, and a chime rang through the hall. "Let the cultural understanding begin," she said with a slight smile. Jason exhaled slowly. If this was how Earth would be introduced to the stars, okay, then he'd better give them a story worth remembering. Jason Rowe sat quietly in his temporary quarters, staring at the glowing screen in front of him, heart pounding as headlines from alien networks scrolled by one after another. Human male possesses limitless endurance. Earthlings capable of 20 consecutive mating cycles. Galactic court shocked by human capacity. His head dropped into his hands as a dozen images of his confused face from yesterday's trial were turned into animated loops, edited with dramatic music, fire effects, and even hearts by alien entertainment broadcasters. He had only spoken a few cautious sentences, trying to keep the moment professional, but now the galactic tabloids had twisted his words into wild exaggerations, translating "it depends" into infinite capability and individual variation into no limits. Earth's ambassadorial staff was in chaos. Messages streamed in from the United Nations, urgent calls, requested updates from the Terran Alliance Council, and at the Earth-Cathari line remained jammed with worried diplomats asking if war was about to break out or if humans were being recruited for alien matchmaking programs. Jason had never wanted to crawl under a rock more in his life. The worst part? Some species didn't think this was funny. They were furious. One message from the insectoid Klaxor Republic claimed Jason's words were an intentional humiliation of their people, who prized physical strength above all, and now believed Earth was mocking their endurance traditions. Another came from the aristocratic Fenari, stating their royal biologists demanded samples for confirmation of these claims, threatening to cut off trade unless human superiority was openly admitted or refuted. Jason blinked at the screen, stunned, whispering, "This can't be happening." And then the door slid open, revealing Zelenara herself, her face unreadable. "Walk with me," she said simply, and Jason followed, nervously keeping pace. Beside her, down a long corridor lit with hovering lights that shimmered like floating jellyfish. "I owe you an explanation," she said quietly, "and perhaps an apology. Did not mean for this to become political. Right? My question was meant for curiosity, not diplomacy." Jason nodded slowly, unsure what to say, but she continued, "What I forgot is how quickly the Concord reacts to difference. You spoke carefully, but others heard what they wanted to hear. Now it has become more than misunderstanding, it's identity. Species who have always believed themselves stronger, more evolved, more noble, are now questioning that belief." Jason sighed, all because of a question about human biology. She stopped and turned to face him. "Not biology," she said softly. "Perception. Your people are unknown to the galaxy, and now they are mysterious, possibly dangerous, and completely fascinating. You represent unpredictability. That is what they foran desire. Jason didn't know if he should be flattered or terrified. As they entered the royal archives, a large, circular chamber lined with floating data crystals, a team of translators and historians were already working on something. "We are trying to correct the record," said Selenara, motioning toward the screen. "We've started issuing clarifications, sending the original language file of your answer with full Earth dialect context. But it may not be enough. The stories have already spread." Jason watched a report from a frontier system play out to alien merchants arguing in a public square. One claiming humans were the next dominant species. The other demanding proof through a mating endurance duel, whatever that meant. Another clip showed a fan group that had formed overnight on a tropical moon, waving banners with his face on them, calling themselves the followers of the infinite flame. Jason's jaw dropped. "Not a symbol," he muttered. "And?" Selenara replied, "You are, now." Just then, a high-pitched alarm rang across the archive and incoming threat signal. Guards rushed into position as a holographic display lit up with a new message: the Grauwek Dominion. A prideful, warlike empire that had once fought the Cathari in border skirmishes, demanding Earth send a representative for an official trial of genetic truth or face honor reevaluation. Jason groaned. "What does that mean?" Selenara narrowed her eyes. "It means they think your species is hiding strength. They're preparing a challenge, not war, but something close." Jason's voice cracked. "Because of a misunderstanding. Because of what they think you represent now," she said grimly. "You are unpredictable. That is dangerous to them." The rest of the day passed in frantic preparation. Jason was assigned a team of alien scientists to assist in drafting a biological truth report. But it was clear no data would matter to those who had already made up their minds. The story had taken on a life of its own. That night, Jason was called to a private diplomatic meeting where ambassadors from 4 species, 2 allies, 10 knowns spoke to him through a universal translator sphere. One of them, a jelly-bodied being from the Trinari spiral, floated forward and asked, "Human, are you willing to provide samples?" Jason blinked. "What kind of samples? Genetic, hormonal, reproductive, cognitive, behavioral?" Jason held up his hands. "I am not a science project." A tall, crystalline ambassador from the Jelvian Accord spoke next. "Then, perhaps, a demonstration would suffice. Not of physicality, but of resolve. You must show the galaxy what a human truly is beyond myth, beyond mistake." Jason left the meeting in silence, the weight on his shoulders growing heavier by the hour. Back in his chamber, he stared out the window at the stars, wondering how a single, awkward question had turned into this galactic whirlwind. Behind him, the door chimed. It was Selenara again, her voice softer this time. "You are not alone in this," she said. "But we cannot run from it. We can only shape what comes next." Jason looked at her, unsure whether to feel honored or trapped. "What exactly comes next?" She stepped closer, her expression serious. "A trial of tenacity, an ancient tradition. You will not face it alone. I will stand as your sponsor." Jason swallowed hard. "If I fail?" Her voice was calm. "Then Earth becomes known as the species that bluffed and broke. But if you succeed, you will not only clear the misunderstanding, you will give your people a place of respect in the stars." Jason nodded slowly, heart racing. He had come here as a translator, a bridge between worlds. Now, he was a symbol, a myth, a spark lighting a fire he never meant to start. And tomorrow, that fire would burn even brighter. Jason Rowe stood alone at the center of a vast arena carved into the side of a glowing mountain. The sky above, thick with colorful clouds, and 3 hovering moons that watched like silent judges as crowds of alien spectators filled the balconies surrounding him. each species curious to witness the human who had turned into an accidental legend. Now, facing the ancient Cathari challenge, known as the Trials of Tenacity Gauntlet, meant to measure mental strength, emotional control, and physical willpower. Not to punish, but to reveal truth, a tradition older than most Concord member worlds. And once used to test leaders before peace had replaced conquest, yet now revived in his honor. Or perhaps as a final test of whether Earth's myths would hold under pressure. And as the princess appeared on a floating platform above, robed in deep blue and silver, her voice rang clear and firm. Jason Rowe of Earth, do you enter the trials by your own will? And though he wanted to run far from this madness, he knew there was no turning back. Not for his world, not for himself. And so he nodded once, loudly enough for all to hear. I do. And the crowd fell silent before the floor beneath him shifted, lowering him into the first chamber, lit by pale white walls and humming softly as if the room itself breathed. And then a calm voice spoke from hidden speakers. Trial 1. Perception, distortion, endured the illusion. Trust only your reason. And without warning, the chamber flickered and morphed. The walls melting into spinning mirrors, showing him things that were impossible. His childhood bedroom, his old dog, his mother calling his name. Then flashes of Earth cities burning, aliens cheering, people pointing at him in disgust. The images blending into one another so fast his knees weakened. And as he tried to focus, voices called to him from every direction. Liar, symbol, faker, hope, champion, shame. And he clenched his fists, realizing the test wasn't about strength, but clarity. He had to remember who he really was, strip away the images and voices, and focus only on the truth. So he closed his eyes, sat cross-legged in the center of the floor, and repeated silently, I'm Jason Rowe, cultural envoy of Earth. I'm here for peace. And with each repetition, the room calmed, the voices faded, and the illusions began to break, until finally, the walls returned to their smooth white state, and the speaker said, Trial 1, passed. And Jason exhaled, dizzy but clear-headed, as the floor shifted again and carried him upward into Trial 2, a chamber filled with sound, overlapping, conversations, alarms, weeping, laughter, music. Sheena at once and increasing in volume until he could barely think. His head aching as lights flashed in time with the noise, and the voice returned. Trial 2, emotional controls to calm under pressure, and suddenly the ground beneath him vibrated. The air thick with static, his heart pounding as every sense was pushed to its limit. And just when he thought he might snap, a memory came to him, his father, teaching him how to breathe. Through panic, before school speeches. In through the nose, hold it, out slow. And Jason did just that, blocking out the chaos, anchoring himself with steady breaths, and slowly, the volume lowered, the lights dimmed, and the voice declared. Trial 2, passed, and Jason dropped to his knees, soaked in sweat, but still focused, still whole. And then the platform shifted again, lifting him to Trial 3, which looked at first like a garden, with strange glowing trees and a still pond, but the voice soon said, Trial 3, empathy valuation field, without breaking. And out from the shadows walked figures, not aliens, but perfect images of people Jason had known, friends, old classmates, even a woman he once loved, but never told, and each one spoke to him with sorrow, disappointment, fear, telling him how he had failed them, ignored them, left them, and Jason stood there, helpless, knowing they weren't real, but still feeling their words cut deep, 'cause the feelings were his own guilt, his own regrets, shaped into form. And as the images wept, he felt the ache rise in his chest, the part of him that always wondered if he had chosen the right path in life. And then the voice whispered, let it go or be lost. And Jason looked at the illusions, tears in his eyes, and said softly, "I'm sorry I wasn't perfect, but I'm still trying." And as he said it, the garden faded, and silence returned, and the voice said, "Trial 3 passed," and Jason sat quietly for a moment, heart sore but steady, before the final platform rose, bringing him into the last chamber, massive open dome with no roof, exposing him to the sky as lightning danced above and winds whipped around him. And standing at the other end was a massive figure, a Cathari warrior in ceremonial armor, standing twice Jason's height, holding a staff with a crystal blade, and the voice said, "Final trial. Will of the body survive, endure, resist?" And Jason had no weapon, only his instincts, as the warrior lunged forward, fast and heavy, and Jason dodged, barely missing the blade that slammed into the floor, cracking stone. And though he couldn't fight back, he could stay on his feet, and so he ran, rolled, ducked, always staying one breath ahead, his legs burning, lungs screaming, but his mind sharp, refusing to give in. And minutes turned to what felt like hours, the storm above roaring louder, as each strike from the warrior grew more desperate. And at last, Jason collapsed to one knee, but instead of finishing the blow, the warrior stopped, looking down at him with respect, then bowed low, and the voice declared, "Final trial passed," and the storm broke into light, the winds stilling, and a beam lifted Jason gently to the top of the dome, where Princess Selenara waited, her expression unreadable until she stepped forward and placed her hand over his heart, saying, loud enough for all to hear, "This human has passed, not because he fought harder, but because he endured smarter." And the crowd erupted in a wave of sound that Jason couldn't describe: cheers, chants, song, something deeper than applause. And as he stood there, trembling but upright, he realized something had changed, not just in how they saw him, but in how he saw himself, because, for the first time, he wasn't just surviving diplomacy or correcting misunderstandings. He was proving that humanity belonged among the stars, not as a myth, not as a joke, but as something real, something tenacious. And as the trial platform lowered and the lights dimmed, Jason looked up at the alien sky and whispered, 3 trials down, and who knows what's next. Jason Rowe had barely recovered from the trials of tenacity when the next wave of attention struck like a meteor across galactic news feeds. No longer just a diplomat or accidental icon, he was now the subject of an interstellar scientific inquiry, with messages flooding in from dozens of research councils, genetic institutes, and xenobiology labs requesting full biological data on the tenacious Earthling who had survived illusions, noise storms, emotional confrontation, and a battle of endurance with a Cathari warrior. And despite the Cathari declaring him an honorary citizen, and even the reluctant Gralvik Dominion issuing a rare formal nod of respect, the real question buzzing across alien networks was no longer about strength or myth, but what made humans, what made him so resilient. And as Jason sat in a quiet room in the Royal Research Dome, white walls humming with faint biosignature scanners, he began to understand the strange pressure that came with being seen, not just as a person, but as a specimen. And across from him sat Selenara, her expression softer than usual, her fingers tapping a console, revealing charts of human DNA, hormone maps, and stress response graphs taken during the trials. And she spoke calmly, "Many species want to know how you endured what others could not. They believe your biology holds the answer." And Jason swallowed hard, unsure whether to be proud or disturbed, asking, "You mean they want to take me apart?" And she shook her head, saying, "No, but they want to understand, and more than that, some want to copy." And Jason blinked in surprise, realizing that humanity's role in the stars might be shaped not by war, or diplomacy, or culture, but by science. And just as he was about to ask what that meant, a deep humming shook the room, and a screen lit up with a new message from the Concorde's High Science Assembly Earth was being invited to present an official biological declaration, a statement of species data to be reviewed, verified, and shared, something every member species had once done before being accepted fully into the Concord's scientific registry. But now, Earth was being fast-tracked, and Jason was expected to speak for his kind again, not as a translator this time, but as an example. And as he stood in the shining hall of the assembly chamber 2 days later, facing a half-circle of alien scientists, thinkers, and biologists whose very forms challenged the definition of life liquid forms, crystalline minds, creatures made of light or fungus, he felt the weight of his task press into his spine. And when the lead speaker, a floating, multi-eyed being named Dr. Vrolath, said, "We request clarity, not speculation, what defines human endurance?" Jason took a breath and said plainly, "We're not the fastest. We're not the strongest. We're definitely not the smartest in this room, but we don't give up easily, And that seems to count for something," which drew murmurs and clicks from the audience. And then he continued, telling them about Earth's extremes, how humans survived deserts, climbed icy mountains, crossed oceans in wooden ships, endured plagues, wars, starvation, and still rebuilt every time. And when they asked about the human brain, Jason explained how emotion and logic battled daily, how humans cried when they laughed, scared, and laughed when they feared, how they bonded deeply, sometimes for life, and often risked everything for strangers just because it felt right. And when Dr. Vrolath asked, "Do your people evolve physically or mentally?" Jason answered, "Both, but mostly in spirit." And then a large creature from the acid world asked bluntly, "Then what was the truth behind the princess's question? The one that had started it all?" And Jason hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Humans are complex, and what we can do physically often depends on how we feel emotionally, which caused several scientists to lean forward, interested, and Dr. Vrolath tapped a long claw against a datapad, saying, "That suggests adaptability beyond expectation." And Zelenara added quietly, "Which is exactly what they Ferrand admire." And so the testing began, not invasive, but thorough, with Jason undergoing scans that mapped brainwaves during memory playback, blood tests during artificial stress, reflex challenges under timed conditions, and conversations with AI designed to provoke frustration. But through it all, the strangest thing happened. Jason began to enjoy it. Not because it was easy, but because every result surprised him, not for being superior, but for being strange. His adrenaline responses were inconsistent. His hormone levels shifted with mood and thought. His neural activities seemed to light up during emotional reflection more than logic. And one machine even broke, temporarily trying to calculate the chaotic curve of a human fear response. And day after day, the scientists began to murmur among themselves. "They're unpredictable. They're not optimized. They're adaptive. Emotion guides survival." And by the end of the week, a new phrase had spread through the assembly: biological chaos theory, human pattern model. And Jason stared at the chart they made, showing human resilience, not as a straight line, but as a jagged map of highs, lows, and sudden spikes that made no sense at first glance, till you realized the pattern was chaos itself, and in a galaxy of structured life that made humans rare, even dangerous, not for what they could do, but for how they endured the unexpected. And as the High Science Assembly approved Earth's entry into the registry, a new concern began to rise. Species that feared unpredictability began to view humans as potential disruptors, not intentionally, but by nature. And one council member whispered to another, "What happens when they start exploring freely?" While others wondered aloud, will they stabilize or reshape everything? And that night, Jason sat on a balcony overlooking the Cathari capital, watching ships rise into the sky like fireflies, his mind turning over the words he'd heard all day, And when Zelenara joined him, silent for a while, he asked quietly, "Did we do the right thing?" And she replied, "You showed them who you are. That is all anyone can truly do." And Jason said, "But now they see us as a variable, not a friend or a threat, just chaos." And she nodded slowly, "Chaos that survives." And for the first time, Jason saw what made his people different, not their strength, not their knowledge, but their refusal to fit into a single definition. And as the stars turned above them, he knew the next challenge wouldn't be tests or trials, but what came after, how the galaxy would treat a species that refused to be predictable, and whether Earth would rise as a partner or as a wild card. They all watched closely, and in the shadows of the city, strange new messages were already forming, species debating whether to ally with Earth or contain it. The Grand Concord Hall had never been this full, with every seat occupied by members of over 100 species, some wrapped in translucent robes, some glowing softly under their own biolight, and others humming or clicking in their native frequencies, all gathered under the massive glass dome that reflected the swirling galaxies above. And at the center of it all stood a simple podium, small compared to the size of the chamber. Yet it was there that Jason Rowe, the human who had survived the trials, endured the science inquiry, become a living question to the galaxy, was now expected to speak not as a scientist or warrior, but as the representative of Earth, whose admission to the Concord had been officially approved, but whose future remained uncertain. Because, while many praised humanity's resilience and depth, others whispered of instability, unpredictability, and danger wrapped in kindness. And as Jason stepped forward, dressed not in armor or a diplomat suit, but in a simple, earth-made jacket, he felt every eye on him, even those that didn't look like eyes. And for a moment, he stood silent, letting the weight of silence press down on the chamber, before he finally spoke, his voice calm but clear. "I come here not to convince you that humans are better or worse than any of you, only that we're real, and we're here to stay." And the room didn't move, waiting for more. And Jason continued, "I've been through your trials. I've been scanned, tested, and studied. And you've seen the same thing I have. Humans don't make sense on paper. Our biology is full of contradictions. Our minds swing between logic and emotion. Our history is messy, painful, and full of mistakes. But somehow, so we survive. And when we survive, we build, we grow, we imagine, and murmurs pass through the hall, not of rejection, but curiosity." And Jason pressed on. "When Princess Zelenara asked me a question that made the galaxy laugh, many thought it was foolish. But I see now that it wasn't a joke, it was curiosity. It's a kind that starts every scientific discovery. And instead of being offended, I answered honestly, 'Cause that's who we are. We ask strange questions, and we answer them, even when we're not sure of the result." And now some of the more skeptical species leaned in, analyzing not just his words, but his calm delivery, the emotional current in his voice. And Jason knew this was more than a speech, it was a test of whether humans could be trusted with truth. And he gave it to them, saying, "You think we're dangerous because we're chaotic, because we're hard to predict, because we feel too much or act without full understanding. But I say that's our strength when things break. We don't wait for permission to try something new. When someone suffers, we don't ask if it's logical to help them. We just do it." And one delegate from a cold, logic-based species tilted its triangular head, intrigued, as Jason added, "Yes, we fight. We've fought each other. We've made terrible choices. But every time, we've learned. And every time we've learned, we've passed that learning forward. So maybe we're not stable in the way you expect, but we are relentless in our hope." And for the first time, a murmur of agreement swept through the hall, soft but steady, and Jason knew he had to say what no one else would. "Some of you want to ally with Earth. Some of you want to isolate us, and some of you hope we disappear before we change too much. I understand all of those feelings, but I ask this: when your species first met the unknown, were you ready? Were you perfect? Were you simply willing to try? And now, even the most reserved members were watching him closely, and Jason let his voice grow stronger. We're not here to lead. We're not here to conquer. And we're not here to vanish. We're here to join. And if that scares you, then maybe it should. Not because we mean harm, but because real unity always changes everyone. And he stepped away from the podium for a moment, pacing slowly, making eye contact with different species, knowing his next words had to be bold. The galaxy doesn't need more order, needs more courage. The kind that lets you trust someone who isn't like you. And if you want stability without growth, then you don't want peace, you want silence. And humans were never meant to be silent. And now the chamber was completely quiet. Not from discomfort, but from focus, from the pool of meaning in his words. And Jason raised his hand, gesturing to the dome above. Those stars up there. We've looked at them for thousands of years without ever knowing if someone looked back. And now that we know we're not alone, we don't want to stand behind a wall. We want to stand with you. And Princess Zelenara watched him with an unreadable look, remembering the Jason who had first arrived, unsure, awkward, and sometimes overwhelmed, and realizing this was someone who had grown into his purpose. Not by force, but by truth. And Jason looked to her as he finished. I don't ask for trust blindly, I ask for a chance to earn it, the same way we've earned everything else. And with that, he stepped back from the podium, unsure what would come, about knowing he had spoken his heart. And at first, there was silence, long and uncertain, and then slowly, a ripple of light passed through the chamber, not sound, but a signal of approval among certain species, followed by musical tones from another group, followed by a long, low chime from the Cathari delegation. Tay. And one by one, the hall responded, not in applause, but in their own ways, approving, acknowledging, accepting. And it wasn't everyone, not yet, but it was enough, because Jason could feel the balance shift, not in dominance, but in respect. And as he left the stage, Zelenara met him at the archway, her voice soft but sure. That wasn't just a speech. That was a seed. And Jason smiled, weary, but proud. Let's hope it grows. And far above them, satellites translated the speech into dozens of languages, broadcast across colonies and stations, where humans watched with wide eyes and quiet pride, while alien listeners debated in new ways, wondering if this strange species from a blue planet had just changed the meaning of unity itself. Days after, Jason Rowe's speech shook the stars and echoed across every Concord world. Things began to change, not suddenly, but in small, sharp ways that hinted at something deeper stirring beneath the surface. And while many species welcomed humanity, more openly offering invitations to shared academies, resource exchanges, and cultural dialogues moved in quiet shadows, their messages encrypted, their signals bouncing through untraceable frequencies. And Jason felt the shift, not with words, but with the way silence began to follow him, as though someone or something was watching more than just his footsteps. And the more he spoke with Zelenara, the more he sensed that even she was holding something back, not from distrust, but protection. And one evening, as he walked through the reflecting halls, where the galaxy's most ancient species meditated on time and purpose, he noticed a crack in one of the energy mirrors, barely visible, yet impossible in a structure said to be indestructible. And when he asked a quiet monk-like being nearby, the answer came in a soft hum. Curiosity has limits, and some wish it didn't, which puzzled Jason more than it explained. But soon after, he received a hidden message routed through Earth's new consulate system, unsigned. It's only one sentence long. They were never afraid of your strength. They were afraid you would make others ask questions. That same night, the power flickered in the guest quarter of the Concord Palace, and security drones ran patterns they weren't programmed to follow. And Zelenara called an emergency meeting, her voice sharper than usual, saying, 3 species who rejected Earth have formed a silent pact. They are creating something beyond Concord law, something called the Unseen Path. And Jason frowned, asking, what do they want? And her answer was grim, to keep things the way they've always been, without disruption, without evolution. And Jason understood then that the real threat wasn't war, it was fear of change. Fear that humanity's very presence would spark others to question their roles, to rethink their truths, to desire more than their systems allowed. And that kind of shift could topple ancient balances. So while the Concord smiled in public, forces were moving against Earth in the background. And Jason was told he had to return home immediately, not for safety, but for strategy, because his continued presence on neutral ground might make him a target. But before he could board the shuttle, he was intercepted by a species he hadn't met before, tall, half-shadow, with eyes like glass and voices that echoed inside the head rather than the ears, and their speaker, A being known only as the Whispered, said plainly, you were never just an ambassador. You were a test. And Jason asked carefully, a test for what? And the being replied, to see if chaos could coexist with order without destroying it. Then vanished before anyone could track where it had gone. And the next morning, Jason was gone too. Sent on a ship cloaked in false signals, traveling through lesser-known trade routes, accompanied only by a Cathari guard and a diplomatic AI programmed to mimic his responses in case of ambush. And for 2 days, the journey was quiet, even peaceful. But then came the warning light and identified. Vessels approaching, weapons unpowered, but shields raised. And the captain said, in a low voice, they're not Concord ships. And Jason braced as the ship jolted suddenly, pulled by a gravity tether into an orbit around a dark, unmarked moon. And what they found there changed everything, because deep inside the hollowed core of that moon was not a base or a trap, but a meeting, a secret summit between species considered minor or unimportant by Concord standards, who had come together not to fight, but to learn more about Earth, about Jason, about humans who laughed through pain and questioned everything. And they told him, one by one, your words open something. We want to know more. We want to change too. And Jason realized then that curiosity, once seen as a small spark, had become a quiet fire burning under the galaxy's old systems. And some species feared it, yes, but others were drawn to it, inspired by it, ready to challenge what they had always believed. And so Jason spoke again, not in a great hall, but in a cold chamber lit by faint crystal glow. And he told them the truth, not just of human strength or science, but of failure, doubt, love, and the wild hope that maybe the stars were not just destinations, but mirrors of everything life could be if it dared to grow. And when he finished, there was no applause, only stillness, and then a single voice said, we will follow. And then another, we will listen. And slowly, Jason saw what Earth had truly begun, not a war, not a rebellion, but a question that no one could now unask. And as he left the moon, escorted safely this time, he wondered not what the Concord would do next, but how far this wave of curiosity might spread. And when he returned to Cathari Prime, Zelenara was waiting with news that shook him. One of the Unseen Path's secret leaders had been exposed, not by a spy or force, but by a child asking why things were the way they were. And in their attempt to silence the child, the truth was revealed, and protests had begun even in the oldest, most silent worlds. And Jason asked, was this the plan all along? But she answered, no, it was the risk. And in that moment, Jason realized something deeper than diplomacy, deeper than science or strength. Humans had not changed the galaxy by proving they were better, or stronger, or even wiser. They had changed it by being curious, by asking questions others were too afraid to ask, and by surviving long enough to hear the answers. And now, that same spirit was waking up across species who had long been silent, and what came next would not be peace, or what would be something new, something beyond curiosity itself. And as Jason stood once more beneath the starlit dome of Concord Hall, no longer as a visitor, but as a symbol, he knew the journey wasn't ending, it was only beginning. And the stars, once silent and distant, now seemed to lean closer, waiting not for conquest, but for conversation.